It's impossible to know who to root for in this story, but we'll bring it to you anyway. Donald Trump is turning up the pressure on Health and Human Service Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. It could backfire on Republicans in a big way in November. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Trump is disappointed that RFK Jr. isn't doing enough to probe the debunked connection between vaccines and autism, and then to dismantle federal guidelines when it comes to childhood vaccinations. In a mid-June meeting in the Oval Office, the president vented to Kennedy that he wasn't doing enough. People familiar with the matter say. Trump has also made it clear he thinks he has given Kennedy enough time, and Trump is disappointed that the health secretary has not accomplished more in the past year and a half, people said. This new reporting comes at a time when measles infections in our country have reached a high we have not seen in 35 years. Donald Trump's push to infect the American people with more conspiracy theory-coded medical advice goes against what his own top pollster finds people want. More from that journal reporting. Quote, longtime Trump pollster Tony Fabrizio last winter found that vaccine skepticism is unpopular with voters, while people were more interested in Kennedy's efforts to improve the quality of food and agriculture. In June, another survey showed more than 80% of adults said they trust health information from their own doctors. Just 34% said they trust health information from Kennedy, according to health research nonprofit KFF. We're back with Liz Smith, Mark McKinnon, and Angelo Carasone. Angelo, I want to find those 33% and give them a big hug. But this is a loser. It's also deadly. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same disease that we were just talking about in the first segment, but it's just in a different organ, right? It's that he believes that you can tell a story and it will discount people's lived experience. So first time on the economy, he thinks he can tell a story and that people will ignore it when they go to the register. And in this case, he thinks he can tell a story about vaccines and people will ignore it when we're having the worst measles outbreak in a generation. And that is the gamble that he's telling. Now, there's a larger political question here. Conspiracy becomes policy. I find it kind of amazing that this is the one time the people around him in his own administration are trying to temper him, and he's completely disregarding that reality of it. But I think, to me, it is a reflection of how we're going to see him operate time and time again. It not just tells us where we are in the moment, but also indicates where we're going to go in the future, that this is what he's going to consistently gamble on. And if it was just words or politics, it wouldn't matter. But because the conspiracy is now policy, it, as you noted, has real-world consequences.
I guess the piece that's disappointing, Liz, and I should say, I'm sorry I haven't said it yet, there is no evidence that vaccines cause autism. So he's manufacturing a lie. And we covered at the end of the last hour, new reporting from my colleagues at MS Now, that there are questions about whether intelligence has now been manipulated or manufactured to support the lie that somehow the 2020 election was rigged against Donald Trump. This Wall Street Journal reporting walks up to the cliff over which is Donald Trump wanting medical information to support the lie that vaccines cause autism.
Yeah, and it's obviously very troubling. I have a almost 3-year-old at home, and for, any parent of young kids or anyone with immunocompromised people in their household, the thought of, declining vaccination rates is fairly terrifying. And one thing, though, I do think that we should think about is what this means politically, because a lot of people aren't listing vaccines or vaccinations as like their top political issue. But I do think that there is an opportunity for Democrats to go in on this issue and appeal to the MAHA voters or MAHA curious voters and take the parts of the MAHA agenda that were actually popular, getting additives out of food, getting pesticides out of water. And a great example of that is Jamie Yeager in North Carolina. He's a farmer running in a big battleground seat. And he talks about regenerative farming and things like that. And that is a key part of his pitch. And a lot of candidates running right now in these battleground districts are parents. They are outsiders. They have a unique ability to speak to this issue because they are personally have a lot of skin in the game. But beyond just the political implications, I do think it's really troubling because this is something that will have effects beyond November. A vaccine skepticism is in itself a disease. And when you start expressing doubts about vaccines, it spreads. And it's something that could have really negative impacts for public health for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, Mark, the vaccine schedule is aggressive, and watching your little tiny kid get jabbed is traumatic. And so you don't have to be a full-on vaccine denier or truther. You just have to have that little kernel of doubt, like, oh, what's the big deal? And then suddenly you're in the emergency room with something that is preventable and really dangerous for a really, really little kid. So you don't have to tune out the most sort of extreme messages. This affects wide swaths of Americans. And on this MAGA point, or MAHA point, I mean, they haven't delivered on getting pesticides out. I think we've gone in the other direction. They haven't delivered on a lot of the making food healthier things. There's been talk. There are a lot of shirtless, no offense to anyone shirtless in their age bracket, but there are a lot of social media posts with them shirtless doing exercises, and not a lot of deliverables for people who thought they were Trump voters because of the MAHA vision.
Well, you just have to shake your head at the notion of Donald Trump going into Bobby Kennedy and saying you're not being nutty enough. But to Liz's point, the thing that strikes me about that is that, the one sort of thread or lane that that Bobby Kennedy, I think, had a lot of potential to reach voters across the spectrum was on this whole food additives and healthier foods. I mean, I think there's a real play there, legitimately and politically, that would appeal across the board. And for Trump to come in and say, away from that stuff, let's get back to the nutty conspiracy, crazy stuff that actually kills people. And by the way, we don't need any other sort of direct, obvious vaccine evidence than what's happening with measles. I mean, you just have a clear cause and effect. You take away the vaccine, measles go up, and it's now at a rate I think that's higher than it's been in 50 years. So that's what happens when you don't pay attention to science. And I don't. It's interesting that Liz says that polls highly, because I don't get it. I mean, I understand sort of the spread of the conspiracy notion. But, for any parents out there that are really thinking about the health of their kids, it just kind of baffles me.
Angelo, these are the facts on measles right now. These are numbers from the CDC. There have been 2,318 cases of measles reported nationwide, exceeding the 2,289 cases reported last year. The current figure is the highest incidence of measles in 35 years. So again, by numbers from their own administration, there are more people sick with measles than we have had in this country in 4 decades.
I think one of the things that I would note here is that it's because a lot of people started taking action. And what Trump is activated about is that this constituency that wouldn't take these vaccines was pushing. That vaccine hesitancy has been growing. Trump has consistently built and organized power on what used to be considered the fringes. And, if you can tap into that kinetic energy, you can build political momentum one way or another. And so there is sort of this instinct that he's sort of tapping into there. But I think to Liz's point, and it's worth noting, MAHA broadly is going to be one of the most durable parts of MAGA's political power. Whether or not it stays MAGA aligned is an open question, but it's going to be durable. And there's a lot more to it. And the vaccine hesitancy people are just a small part of it, but they tap into a larger story, which is that the entire industry, there's something off about all these industries, and they need to be dealt with. And, it's worth noting that we're talking about this measles outbreak, but, which could be a far afield from people that feel like they're safe and satisfied and they're vaccinated. But, it's not the diarrhea lettuce. And it's part of the same department and incompetency in administration. So there is a real, again, similar to the first discussion, the more he consistently tells these stories, and we should note that it's for a reason. It's to activate the fringes, and there's real powerful consequences when he's able to successfully do that, when he's able to tap into them. The QAnon people, all these things. This is what he's done historically. But there's a real moment, too, because he's not able to then feed the beast that he's sort of waking up. And that's where the tension starts to mount and where there's a real space to act.